My name's Cameron Brown. I'm the CCO of Against Gravity. I'm a co-founder. I'm kind of the product guy. So we make Rec Room, which is a social VR app currently available on the Vive and the Rift. It's been out and live for about 13 months. If you want to find me on Twitter, this is me. If you want to find me on Reddit, this is me. Very active there, both in kind of as kind of like de facto community manager of Rec Room. My background is basically a video game guy. I've been 20 years in the video game industry. Right before Against Gravity, I was a creative director on the HoloLens program. Spent 4 years at Microsoft prototyping mixed reality stuff for HoloLens. I started my career in Australia at a crew called Beam Software. Used to work at Pandemic. Basically, game guy. That's kind of my DNA. So I want to talk a little bit about Rec Room and what it is first. Just some people may not be aware of what Rec Room is, so this is going to be a 2-minute overview of what the heck is Rec Room. So this is our kind of elevator pitch for what Rec Room is. We think of it as a virtual reality social club where you play active games with friends from all around the world. And so this is a kind of GIF of what it looks like. I've got a lot of GIFs in my presentation. So this is what you look like in Rec Room. This is one of my coworkers, kind of standing around, looking around, talking. You can kind of see it's a bright, happy, fairly stylized universe, but we really focus on social interactions first, physical interactions first. We're not trying to make a photorealistic experience. So this is our Steam store page. I've kind of highlighted here something we're quite proud of is that we've maintained a 98% positive rating on Steam since launch. And I really mention that because yes, we're proud of it, but B, it really kind of to me shows that there's a very hungry audience out there for social VR experiences. There's really something here that regular humans really connect to and really love. And so it's been very encouraging to us to find an audience and kind of have them respond so positively to the game. Few more GIFs just to kind of show you what the experience of Rec Room is like. This is the experience of constructing your avatar. So we basically have this physicalized interface. You open drawers. All of the stuff that you have comes out around you. You simply grab it and put it on the appropriate part of your body. So here we're browsing dresses. We're going to put a dress on. You just touch it to your body. And so we try and make things, by using physicalized interfaces, we try and make things as discoverable and as simple as possible in Rec Room. This is playing one of the active games. This is one of the earliest games we did. It's called Paddleball. It's kind of a very simple kind of 3D squash/pong kind of variant. But you can kind of see it's using all of the capabilities of a Vive or a Oculus with touch, the tracked hands and all that kind of thing. This was a game we added. This is our paintball game. This was the very first paintball level we added where people could kind of like crouch behind objects, play in a really physical style, dodge, shoot each other with paintball. And this was one of the activities where we really started to notice that audience engagement was going up and people were really sticking around. And before we knew it, we now have players who have 1,300, 1,400 hours of paintball played. We've got some paintball obsessive now. And this was one of our more recent game modes. This was what we called Quest. After developing paintball, which was kind of a competitive experience where you played 4v4 competitive paintball, we realized that we wanted something that was a little more social. So this is an adventure mode that you play with 4 friends. So you get 4 friends together, you go on an adventure, you can revive each other by high-fiving, and we found that this is a very popular one too. So we think of our approach as what we call structured social. So we believe it's very important that you have something to do and that having a shared context and something to do immediately when you get into Rec Room creates the relationships that you want to have. So rather than just kind of put you in a room and expect you to socialize, we give you something to do, and by the end of the night, you've gone on a magical quest, you've shot paintballs at each other, and then you're much more likely to be like, hey, we should do this again, this is really fun, and before you know it, you've made a friend. So, what I'm going to cover in the rest of this deck, and I'm going to go reasonably quick because 20 minutes is not a huge amount of time. I want to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about creating a community, like Ty said, in Rec Room, and some of what we've done to curb some of the harassment issues that are possible in new ways. A lot of online communities deal with harassment issues in various ways. Social VR adds this very kind of physicalized component to it. And so we want to talk a little bit about some of the experiments that we've done, some of the successes we've had, some of the failures we've had, with the goal of sharing that information so that, you don't have to make the same mistakes we did, basically. And then I've got a few recommendations for just how we think about social VR. So the foundation of our approach to creating a healthy community is we have a social mission. And I know it's kind of hokey to have a mission, but we really find this as a useful kind of foundation. We kind of sat down and just spent a day kind of thinking through, what are we trying to achieve here? Really, what does success look like? How do we know that we've done it? And so this is what we came up with. Rec Room is a fun and welcoming environment for people from all walks of life. That's our goal, right? And we say this multiple, I'd be lying if I said we said it to each other daily. We do say it routinely, probably weekly. And I also reflect this out into the community when I'm interacting with people on the forums of like, hey, the reason that what you're doing is not working for us is that it's at odds with our goal. And so I want to break this down a little bit. So the key words are fun. And what we mean by fun is that you want to do it, right? There's many valid definitions of fun. The one that we think is appropriate in this context is that you get home from a busy day at work, you get home from school, maybe you're tired. Rec Room, we want Rec Room to be something that you choose to do. And we really think that, even in this early stage of VR, when it's quite difficult, it's quite a commitment to get into VR, it's expensive, it's complicated to set up, it's often constrained to one room in your house. We think of our competition is not so much other VR experiences. Our competition is just sitting on the couch and watching Netflix, right? When you get home and you're tired and you just want something fun, we need to make sure that Rec Room reliably delivers a fun experience that you'll choose to do. And then by welcoming, what we mean is we don't want you to have a negative experience. We don't want you to have a negative encounter. We don't want you to meet people who are going to troll you, who are going to harass you, who are going to be mean to you. And then moving beyond that, we want to make sure that we're fostering a helpful community. Like we've seen over and over again, the best experiences that a new player has in Rec Room is when they find someone who's willing to show them the ropes and to be their chaperone. And so the more we can do to kind of encourage that and kind of maximize the chances of that happening, the healthier the community is. And then from all walks of life, what we mean is we take a pretty broad definition of, who a player is. And so, in our paintball game, for example, we see players of very different skill levels. We've got players who this is their first time they've ever been in VR. Maybe they're in a VR arcade and they're just teching out for the first time. And then we've got players who've got 1,000 hours in paintball and are total experts. So that's a huge skill gap. Different genders, the male and female experience of being in social VR is different in some important ways. Nationalities, we've got different languages, different cultures, different philosophies, which is, I guess this is my polite euphemism for politics and religion. People are coming at this kind of social context from very different worldviews. Physical disposition, by which we mean, we might have a player who's in a wheelchair or only has one hand available, or is otherwise, just wants to play seated, for example. And then, different levels of intelligence, different levels of intoxication, different levels of distractedness. People have cats running around their feet. People have children running around their feet. So we really try and think through, we want everyone to feel welcome. Not everyone's going to have the same experience, but we want to try and look through all of those lenses and make sure that you can have a great experience and you feel welcomed and you're going to choose to do it again. So this is our foundation. That's what we're trying to achieve. And one of the most important tools is something that we did kind of day one when we launched Rec Room. And a little side story on Rec Room. So we launched it, I think, last June of 2016. And we thought we were soft launching it. We were like, we've got an initial version of the app running. We just want to get it out on Steam Early Access. We'll see how we go. We were really just testing to see if it even worked. But we immediately found people were coming in and staying in, and literally from the first day of Rec Room, there's been people in Rec Room 24/7. It's never been empty since. So I'm very glad that we did some of the social and community building thinking we did very early. And one of the things we did is from day one, there's been the Rec Room Code of Conduct prominently featured in the spaces. Like you have a little dorm room in Rec Room. We have a community rec center that you go to. And the Code of Conduct is available for all to see. And this is really just inspired by, I went to a YMCA. I was thinking through all right, who does this successfully? Who welcomes people from all walks of life on a daily basis? And I thought the YMCA was a pretty good starting point. It's a very inclusive social club, and they have a code of conduct. It's not the same code of conduct, but the idea of an artifact that players can point to and kind of go, hey, here's the rules. Your conduct is not sticking to this, and so we're going to have an issue, is a very powerful social tool. So here's our code of conduct. Rule number 1 is a kind of catch-all: be excellent to each other. Just trying to set the tone. Just, hey, one thing we think of Rec Room is as a relatively small team just down the road in Belltown. trying to entertain a global audience is, one of our kind of hacks that we think about is that, you're content for me and I'm content for you. The most interesting content in Rec Room is other people. And we want to make sure that content is really fun and welcoming content. So rule number 1, be excellent to each other. Rule number 2, no sexually explicit behavior or language. It probably won't shock anyone to learn that, there's a pretty low time to penis in social VR experiences whenever you give anyone a drawing tool, and so we really want to be very explicit about, hey, don't sexualize these situations. That's not what this is about. It makes a large chunk of our audience uncomfortable, so it's not the time or the place. Having said that, this is one we actually added. Something that kind of took us by surprise, we didn't really plan for this, is that we've seen a lot more children in Rec Room than we expected. Our analysis was, $800 headset, $1,000 PC. We're going to be dealing with an enthusiast PC gamer market. Turns out a lot of those people are parents, and they see Rec Room as a very interesting babysitting option. So that's been an interesting one. So we had to be very explicit about banning children under 13. This kind of is riffing off number 2. We don't want to say you can't express sexual thoughts or sexual behavior in Rec Room, but do it in a private activity and make sure everyone's cool with this. This is kind of a consent clause of if you want to find a private space and you want to kind of, explore some more sexual aspects or some more risque aspects, that's fine. We're not religiously opposed to it, but just don't, do it without consent in the public areas. Sexist, racist, discriminatory stuff, harassing people is just not welcome. We want to set the tone on that. And this one was really about cheating and messing with other people's games. Don't do it. So we've had this in since day one. We find that players are really good about kind of policing each other and kind of communicating to each other. And this has become part of, we hope, the community DNA. And so this has also given us a useful tool in the event where we do have to suspend someone or we have to ban someone or we have to talk to someone about their conduct in Rec Room. It's really helpful for us to be able to point to this thing that they know for sure exists. They have definitely seen a bunch of times. It's front and center in the game. So for us, this has been a really powerful tool, and I would definitely recommend that any social VR experience have something like this. Recently, I added this into my deck this morning, actually. I won't go through this in any detail, but we've actually developed a pretty large meta community around Rec Room on Reddit and on Discord and on the Steam forums. We have many thousands of players every day coming and talking to us. And so we actually needed to kind of come up with a code of conduct for our forums as well. It's not VR specific, so I'll move on. But one thing that we did do, just kind of a neat thing that worked out well, was we just said, hey, the Rec Room code of conduct that you're already familiar with, it applies to our forums as well. So any context in which you're interacting with the Rec Room community, the code of conduct applies. So all of those same benefits apply. So now I want to talk about a few specific types of misbehavior and some of the tools and experiments we've done to deal with it. So I'm not going to talk about kids. That's a whole other talk. That's a whole different topic. I'm not going to talk about cheating and exploits and cheating in the games. That's a whole other talk. What I'm going to focus on is verbal harassment and physical harassment, because these are kind of some things that are somewhat unique to social VR. So one of the first things we learned was it's surprisingly difficult in a social VR context, even with spatial audio, even with the ability to see a tracked human. It was surprisingly difficult to tell who was talking. So we did some things where we held community town halls. We had 12 or 16 people come in, and we would just talk to them, hey, how are we doing? What can we add to the game? And I would host a lot of these town halls, and I learned that it was sometimes very difficult to identify which of the avatars was speaking right now, especially when multiple of them were talking. So what we did is something very simple. We added these cartoon-like speech lines that you can see, the white lines coming off either side of the face. And this was just a very simple graphical element that made it completely unambiguous who was talking. So in a harassment incident where the speech is something that's very offensive or is designed to get a reaction out of you, it's very easy to identify who is speaking, and then you can mute them or ignore them or report them. So that was a simple but very effective tool. Then we did a bunch of experimentation of we have mute and ignore and reporting tools, and this is our menu system in the game. And so our first attempt was you would go to a people menu. I think I have a laser pointer. Let's try this. Oh yeah. So we have this people menu here that you can tap on, gives you a list of everyone that's present with you, and you can mute them and ignore them. But it's fairly kind of bureaucratic, for the want of a better word. You kind of like have to dig through a menu, you've got to find them. There's a little bit of a disconnect of like you'd have someone that you're looking at, then you're digging through your menu trying to find them. It was a little indirect, so it kind of was functional but clunky. This is an old picture too. Our more recent watch looks like this. It's like you raise and it comes up here and you just mash buttons. Much easier to use, but still has the same problem of you're going from being present in a situation to digging around in here. And actually, one really interesting lesson we learned, we had a couple of incidents where people were reporting harassment. We had a female player who said, she was harassed in Rec Room. And she had some friends there who were like willing to support her. They had her back and they were reporting and kicking the person from the room who was doing this to her. But from her perspective, what she saw was them disengaging from the situation and looking down and starting to interact with a piece of UI. And even though she knew intellectually that they were helping and they were intervening on her behalf, it felt very demoralizing that they were disengaging their attention from those humans and digging through a menu. So we started experimenting with some other options. So this was a second experiment we did. We didn't end up keeping this one. It was very interesting though. Here we had tiny versions that we called mini-tars of the avatars of other characters so you could more directly identify. And we wanted to like make them feel less powerful. So we made them tiny. You could grab them with your giant hand and you could dunk them into a bucket to like mute them or ignore them. Very interesting like UI experiment. That helped. We got some positive feedback on that, but it didn't really solve the problem. So this is what we have right now. This is our current solution. We call this the stop gesture, also colloquially known as the talk to the hand gesture. And so here, now when someone's talking at you, saying something that you don't want to hear, saying something really inappropriate, you just do this gesture at them. You hold it for a second, you can see that timer running, and it's going to mute them and ignore them, and it's going to bring up the menu for you so you can say, I'm reporting them for this, or I'm going to initiate a vote kick. So this gesture has been really, really much more effective because, like that situation before, you're not disengaging from the situation to the same extent. You're doing something that kind of shows your intent. It's very easy to remember under pressure, and I'll talk about that in the context of physical harassment. Physical harassment is really interesting in social VR because we think the goal is to reclaim your autonomy. I think I heard in the previous panel that they were talking about various experiences that deal with vertigo. And I'm sure many of you who've done VR experiences or have experienced standing on the edge of a cliff in VR is really, really confronting to something very primal in your brain. Even though you intellectually know that you're safe, you could take a step forward and you're not going to go anywhere. There's something in your brain that is like, danger, I don't want to step off this. By analogy, there's something very similar from a social perspective. When someone invades your personal space, when someone gropes at your private areas, when someone like does kinds of obscene gestures at you, it really kind of freaks you out in that kind of vertigo way. And it's counterintuitive. A lot of people don't really seem to believe it until they experience it, but it's very real. And I include this as like, this was an early experience we had. This was Christmas last year. This is a YouTube video that had over 1 million views. It's up to about 1.2, I checked this morning. Streamer is virtually violated by weird guy and his goon. This was an incident we had in Rec Room where someone had figured out how to abuse our movement system to kind of invade people's personal space. This particular streamer, it was his first time in VR. He had no idea what to do. He didn't know. We didn't actually have the stop gesture. We put that in after. He didn't know how to dig through the watch. And his only option was to kind of freak out and rip the headset off and just be like, whoa, that was just way too intense. And so physical harassment, it can be really intense. It can really spoil your day. And the goal that we have is making it easy for you to reclaim your autonomy. So I'm running low on time, so I'll go quick. This was the first experiment we did. We called it ghost mode. We wanted to have this kind of energy pulse. So when you felt like someone was impinging on you, you could send out this pulse of energy. Here, it'll turn off. So this GIF will loop. You'll see it. Here it is. I'm going to turn on ghost mode. You'll see this yellow thing. Boom! Turns everyone into ghosts, and they're translucent. They don't have hands anymore, so they can't be groping at you. And we thought that this would probably help a bunch. But ultimately, it was kind of a failure, and I'll talk a little bit about why. So one, it was overcooked. We thought about it too hard. The ghost metaphor, while it was kind of cute, it didn't really land. People were like, am I meant to like the ghosts? Are they game objects somehow? They didn't really understand what was happening. It was very reactive. Like you had to get harassed first before you could react to it, and that didn't really feel fair. People got flustered and forgot you had to interact with UI, remember which button, and just in the heat of the moment, people just forgot how to do it. And most people didn't even know it was there. So here was the solution that we've currently shipped with that was a much better solution is just what we call the ignore bubble. This is configurable based on your own preference of personal space, and it's a passive system. So you can see as the other player leans into me, they're just going to fade out. So if someone kind of wants to get up in my face or kind of grope me, they really just can't do it. They just fade out and they can't impinge on my physical autonomy. So this has been a very effective solution. It's on by default. You can choose to disable it if you want. Some players don't care. Many players do. Then there's a whole bunch more we can talk about. I'm out of time, so I won't go too deep into this. But like this is kind of, we have an internal reputation system where we kind of try and identify actors who are serial harassers or are out to kind of troll people. And we have a system for kind of progressive punishment and limiting their ability to interact with the game. Our learning so far, real quick, so this would be our recommendation. Set the tone from day one, e.g. with something like the code of conduct. The best solution here is building the right community and the right culture. Realize that a lot of anti-harassment features can be abused. So this is our vote kick feature. You can sort of like gang up on people and vote kick them. So we can talk about that in the Q&A maybe. It was really important to us to listen to a variety of users. For example, our female players, our female employees, had a bunch of really, really good input on the anti-harassment features that, me as a white dude hadn't really thought about. And then the last thing is, if you're going to build a social VR experience, I would expect to spend at least 10% of your development on moderation features. We think of this as just an ongoing, never-ending system that we have to maintain. And as the community grows, we're just going to stay on it. That's it.
That's questions? Great. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
I wonder how much of what because I know you've worked at a bunch of different games companies, more traditional games companies. How much of what people understand from proper moderation and conduct crosses over, and how much of it did you find is just completely unique to VR?
It's a good question. So to quantify it, I'll say 50-50, right? I think there's 50% of it, which is, we have a phrase that we use a lot in the office, which is humans gonna human, right? They're just a certain kind of like, you get a broad spectrum of mindsets. Some people just, are in the mood to troll some nights and they just want to get in there and kind of cause chaos. It happens. It happens on Xbox Live. It happens in PC games. It happens in League of Legends, and it happens in Rec Room. There's just a certain amount of that. So I think that is in common, and probably the proportion of like bad actors to good actors is relatively similar. What makes this a little different, I think, is especially the physical side of harassment, where you can trigger that kind of involuntary monkey brain response, just like the vertigo feeling. You can kind of get that from someone kind of groping at you. Like, that's not something that you really experience in a first-person shooter or a League of Legends or something like that. So that stuff has been pretty new.
Have you had to like outright ban many people? Is that actually?
We've banned a few people. Yeah, we have. Like we have an escalating series of suspensions. And if people just keep coming back, and we sort of put them in our troll bucket. We kind of have like categories that we put our users in. We have kind of like heavily social users who are really there to socialize. We have like gamers who are really there to play the games more than anything else. We have what we call sparkle ponies, which are like first time users, drunk users, just people who are, we classify streamers as sparkle ponies because often a streamer's goal is to entertain their streaming audience, not necessarily to interact with the people in the world with them. So they're our kind of chaos agents. And then our last kind of bucket of players is just out and out trolls whose their goal is to get a rise out of someone else and make them upset. And when we kind of put someone in the troll bucket, we'll ban them.
Cool. Yeah, thanks very much, Cameron. That was awesome. I've heard that like 4 or 5 times, and it's great every time. So,
all right. Thank you.
Stuff.